Okay, good day, James. I'm artificially saying hello to you again because I've just started recording, whereas
Good morning,
before
Mark. Nothing that just transpired has transpired officially, but now it is transpiring.
transpiration confirmed. So yeah, we've already done the pleasantries. It's bullshit, and I'm getting alerts on my phone, of course. Uh,
What?
yeah, go on.
What? Okay.
Yeah, go on.
Question. Just in
Do go on. I think I've said it for the third time.
up. Regarding your background, this AI generated background, right? This
Yeah,
fantasy AI generated
yeah,
background. Big question here.
yeah.
Why do men love that shit? And I include
I
myself.
mean, well, but of course you include yourself. I wonder if we're extrapolating from a fairly small sample size of us to like an
All men are
entire
like me. All men are like
gender.
me. All men are like me.
Extraordinary stuff.
That's so
Really in
bad.
the thick of it already, aren't we?
Yeah.
But like men, it's the speaks to the male fantasy, which is. But yeah, I don't know about men. Like, but like I would like. This is what I've. This is a consistent fantasy my whole life. I would like to be. I mean, it speaks actually to two things here. Honestly, this image.
Mm.
One of them is. I would have to get into my entire homegrown theory of aesthetics to explain it, which is that it's about the juxtaposition of regular artificiality and organic nature. And on the other hand, it speaks to this drive for solitude. So again, I don't know. I mean, this is a big thing on my mind at the moment, actually. That sociability among humans, men, whatever. More. It's more of a question with men, I suppose. But yeah, like because I don't generally feel sociable. I since I was very young, I remember deeply wishing that I was alone. Indeed, when I was a child, I mean, this is a real bomb to drop in it. But when I was a child, I used to fantasize about the extinction of the human race, myself accepted. Like I used to wish that
Wow.
everyone else would die.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I think is unusual. Like
I would say that. I would
I
say that's
remember as like a 7 year old confiding in a friend of mine about this who really didn't understand.
and I mean, I too don't understand. But a friend, this is only related tangentially, but I was speaking to a friend of mine who has recently, as many men in their 30s do, has taken up running. And he described it as micro-dosing abandoning your family.
Fucked up.
It's
Um,
tough, but I think also profoundly true.
but I see. I have so many thoughts about this because on the one hand, I think it's quite obvious, and this speaks to, if we want to get sociological, the male loneliness epidemic we hear about, which I think is a real
I've
thing.
heard many things.
But my experience of this, and this goes also to this kind of sexual difference here between men and women, because I think for me, I have a fantasy about solitude, but actually the reality is that I actually do need other people, but I somehow fail to appreciate the reality of this. Like, whereas, so I kind of imagine myself as atomically self-sufficient and therefore fantasize about other people not being around, but it would be a nightmare. Certainly, if I'd been like a 7 year old and actually been in that position, I don't think I would have enjoyed it very much. I would have wanted my mummy. But I think
Who
men,
among us?
pardon? Well, I mean, to get forward in, but I think men want their mummies. Some men are Italian and are more in touch with that than the rest of us. But I think, but women, I think, like, it's women may be more sociable than men, but they're also more aware of their social requirements. So women will actually plan ahead on the basis that they need to interact with other people. Whereas I think me as a man, anyway, and I think I'm quite unusually extreme in this, but actually, if you look at the male loneliness epidemic and the stats that show that lots of men have zero friends or report having zero friends, I think that as a man, you kind of get yourself in this situation where where I mean, I certainly do this, like shut myself from everyone else because I can't see any necessity of them, and then rue this, like get in a
Yeah,
terrible
yeah,
position.
yeah.
But I do have an additional thing with your mate, the runner,
Yeah.
about this because I mean I do not the one glaring exception here is with my own family. That is not the family that I was born into, which obviously, in some sense, I wish to get out of the crocodile's jaws of, as people do. But the family I've now created, I do not really wish to be away from them.
No.
So that's a different one. But possibly because, when you're in the paternal role, you no longer dislike other people in the same way as you do when they're friends or relations.
This is a very basic bitch story, but it's true in the sense that it was actually quite.
Well, it is one of your stories, to be fair, Jam.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's me through and through. I'm staying on brand, but nonetheless, someone has
so unfair.
Someone has to do it.
Unfair to yourself, James. Please.
A few years ago, I read this article about the male loneliness epidemic, and it was saying something along the lines of, and it was like a mainstream. It might have been Guardian. I don't know. It was a mainstream liberal newspaper, and it was saying that the main difference statistically is that men do not make any new friends after university. Now, obviously, we're dealing with a particular subset of men there, obviously class and stuff. But it was basically saying, men after university do not make any new male friends in particular, or any friends for that matter. And then what happens is generally, they're straight. Generally, they will just become friends with the husbands of their wife's friends, which aren't really friends. They're more just acquaintances, and you see them once in a blue moon. But the point is that they're not actually occupying a genuine friendship role. Anyway, I remember reading this and being like, well, that's not me. And then, of course, I reflected on this and I was like,
no, it is.
It's 100% me. And not only that, and not like to the point of caricature. And then
except that you're not married, of course.
Well, no, that's right. I know that level. There's some sin there. But but also realizing that I was doing what you just described, which is that, I have all these friends. I have very, very many dear friends, but I also wasn't feeling the need to see them. I kind of saw them. It's not that I took them for granted necessarily. It's just that I saw them as a static entity that I could always rely on, without realizing that these kind of social things tend to fall apart if you don't actually cultivate them.
Yeah.
And that even though I was probably in my mid-20s then, so this is quite a long time ago, and I was like, oh, it's fine for now, but I could see it. Well, actually, no, this is going to start disappearing if I don't actually start to cultivate this. Anyway, this was actually quite an important moment for me, where I then started actually actively cultivating the same friendships I have and trying to make new ones, which for the most part has worked. So what I'm trying to say is the Guardian saved me.
Fucking hell.
I just said that to annoy you.
Now that I was not ready for.
Yeah, that's right. But anyway,
you're like the Voltaire of friendship.
We were meant to read an article today, not a Guardian one, but
no.
I don't know if that's happening.
Fuck that.
Yeah.
I just, plans. Mice and men, etc. Okay, this is extraordinary stuff, really. I mean, you're in such a strange position with this as well, because you and I mean, in the present day, because of your practice disdain for social media.
Oh yeah.
But I think actually that helps you. I was greatly, and I think the level of our friendship is in no small amount due to the fact that you quit Facebook like a decade ago or more.
In 2019, so not quite that long, but a long time.
It seems longer, but because that then resulted in me texting you and stuff, which previously I wouldn't have bothered doing.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone I'm actually friends with on Facebook, I therefore have allowed my relationship with them to completely stagnate to the point
totally atrophy.
They're dead. Yeah, because you have the illusion that you are friends with the people on Facebook, but then that doesn't require any maintenance at all. But yeah, I'm a salutary tale, really, because unlike you, I don't read the Guardian, so there was no road to salvation from the isolated penury I find myself in.
It's crazy to me that I read that article and that actually changed
disgusting
life for the better. It's actually repulsive.
But I mean, nonetheless, whatever works, right?
And yet here we are. Yeah, at any whatever cost.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. But I've had this. I was reflecting before when you were talking about his friends from university, and maybe you feel somewhat the same way. But it's more dramatic for me because I actually had multiple times at university. So like I
Yeah.
had multiple bites of the cherry. Like I had friends when I was an undergrad, then I went to university. I went to university. I mean, I started doing a PhD at university in the UK, and I did my PhD in Sydney. So I have like, and actually at the time, I did this really deliberately. I had a student asking me about this recently because they were wondering what to do, with their career, and like they're asking about, because I told them I'd spent like a little bit of time outside the academy. Basically, like after I finished my master's degree, I was like, no, fuck this.
Yeah.
I'm getting out here. And I spent like about 6 months outside the academy. It was like, oh my God, I can't cope. I need to be back in the academy.
Get me
Not,
back.
which
Get
it
me
wasn't.
back in the
It
womb.
wasn't quite because I didn't have friends, because I was friends with like the work colleagues I had when I was working for Linguarama GmbH in Düsseldorf. But nonetheless,
That's deep Kelly law.
it is. Yeah.
Not even I know that.
Well, it was a pretty. So I was only there for 4 months, 3 months before I quit, and 1 month doing my notice. But yeah, like the, so I went back to university deliberately because like I didn't feel I could cope with the lack of sociality in the outside world. So I then made like a whole bunch more friends. Well, allowing, of course, my first set of friends to atrophy. When I had this weird experience when after my PhD, I moved back to the UK because I got a job in London in 2008. And of course, almost everyone I went to uni with had moved to London and were living in London. But it was like, by that stage, it was like 8 years after I originally finished uni. And I just kind of imagined, I just was like call these people up, like, hey, let's hang out, like as if my friendship was exactly the same stage it was 8 years ago. And they'd like all moved, they had lives, and like they were like, what the fuck are you? Yeah, sure, I'll see you in like let's schedule something in 2 months' time.
You literally called them up and like, what's up?
Yeah, pretty much.
Who are you?
It wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad as the who are you. I mean, there was a complicating factor, which is that I'd come from Sydney to London, and people in London, like in Sydney, it was very much a like, what are you doing? Let's go somewhere kind of scene. Whereas London was a very much like, yes, I can feasibly do it in a fortnight.
I could put you in the diary.
Yeah. So I think it was a bit of a kind of London difference, but it also was like, yeah, friendships die in darkness.
So true, brother. I mean, okay, like I just thought of this because you mentioned when you were talking to a student, and again, share the male loneliness epidemic, which I'm happy to accept broadly conceived. I actually think, at least for the kids, I just think it's an everyone is lonely epidemic. I think it's women as well. Like I was talking to a student the other day.
Relatively.
Yeah, like I was talking to a student the other day, a woman, and she was like, yeah, first year, 19 years old, whatever. And it became clear very quickly. I mean, she wanted to talk about her work or her studies, obviously, but it became clear within about 5 minutes that she just was so incredibly lonely at university. She had no idea how to make friends, had no idea how to interact with people. And I think I'm even happy to accept that, that perhaps it's harder for young men or whatever, but it just seems like everyone is having this trouble now.
Okay. Now, but this opens another quite particular question for me, which is like how Australian universities work. Because in the UK, as in America, for the most part, you go away to university at college, and it's residential.
Yeah,
and you're forced into these like high intensity mixing situations where you form these friendships. It's a kind of very, I was about to say deliberate process, but it's not accidental, certainly. And Australia, although there are residential colleges mainly catering to people from the country, boarding schools who go on to university, most people who go to university continue to live at home.
Yep.
And my assumption always in Australia is that most people actually continue broadly to have their high school friendship networks be their primary social network, even when they start uni.
Yeah.
And I am reminded of this incident I saw when I was working at Macquarie Uni, where I was there, like, first week of semester. And there was a young woman I saw, like, just in tears on the phone, crying about what loser she was because she hadn't made any friends in her first week of uni.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very, very hard to do. And I don't know, I mean, because you're saying this is stereotypically true of you, obviously you, as a precocious undergraduate at Melbourne University, were clearly on the scene.
That was me, baby.
But how did that shake out for you?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right though, because I think it's compounded now, because although you're right to say that, Australian university students don't leave home, typically speaking, to go to university. There's travel to university, leave city. But at least until relatively recently, but at least you'd think by sort of second year, you would have moved out. Like you would be in a share house. So you'd at least be kind of having some new social world there. Whereas now no one does that because they can't fucking afford it. So everyone just lives at home. And so, right. I mean, yeah, so for me, precocious first year at Melbourne University, blah, 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 blah. Basically, all of my friends were my high school friends, but they were all at Melbourne Uni too, right? Or at least a lot of them.
Yeah.
And then it was only until second year that I started making sort of new friends. And then third year, when I moved out of home in 2010, that was when it sort of it takes off there. But now these kids can't. There's a failure to launch. I know I'm now just talking in cliche generality.
Yeah, but this all makes sense to me. This all makes sense.
True. Like I mean, this student I was talking to before, the one I just mentioned, she lived like, I mean, this will only make sense to people who live in Melbourne, but she lived like beyond Melton, so it's like a 2-hour commute both ways. Yeah. Like you're not making any friends. Like it's over.
No. Yeah, that sucks. I was talking, I mean, I've got a student who described herself to me as a femcel recently.
What does that mean? I mean, I think
like incel, but the girl version.
So like men won't, she can't get a man.
I mean, it's a very, I just think it probably just means she doesn't have a boyfriend. I wouldn't read too much into it.
Me neither.
But much as the incel discourse, I don't think you can read too much in. I think there was a certain level of irony. But I mean, she's someone who's like most of the students we have at Western Sydney. But I mean, most of them come from recent immigrant backgrounds where they wouldn't be allowed to live out of home. I mean, she certainly wouldn't. I've been trying to encourage her towards an academic career, and she's like, "Well, my parents would never let me leave the country to go overseas to a conference or something." I'm like, "Shit, that probably is going to be an issue."
That's fucking wild.
It is, but it's absolutely normal. I had I was talking to I have a teenage son, and I was talking to another student. I have many conversations with students being revealed here. But I was talking about his career aspirations, and she was like, "Oh, would you let him do that?" And I was like, "It's such a culturally different understanding that and this is her in her 20s, but understands career choices to be something that parents have an absolute veto on."
Okay, so one thing I've noticed, this is slightly different, but I've noticed this. I guess this is probably more of a Melbourne Uni thing. So there's a class difference here, and an ethnicity difference. But one thing I've definitely noticed, which I didn't used to notice, is a lot more kids talking about making their parents or their family proud. What the fuck is that shit?
It's trying to destroy them from the inside.
That shit's crazy. I was talking.
But these are your middle class white students, though.
Oh, right? Totally, 100%. But it's but I'd never heard any of my friends in first year uni talk about that shit. Maybe they thought it internally, of course. That's a possibility. But she's struggling at uni, not doing so well, and I was like, well, what are your aspirations? Blah 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 blah. And she was like, well, my parents want me to be a lawyer, but I don't want to do that, so I thought I might do medicine. And I said, well, do you want to do medicine? And she's like, well, not really, but I want to make my family proud. And I was like, that's fucked. That's never going to last. You can't grind your way through a whole medical degree just to make your family proud.
I don't know, man. So this is an interesting one because I wonder if you just didn't meet these people and they'd always been around.
Yeah, this is possible.
Because I remember there being these guys in high school, and specifically multiple guys. I'm thinking of two in particular who became doctors, who they weirdly had this thing from a really young age where their parents had told them they had to be doctors, and that was their set thing the whole way through high school.
Were they white, Anglo?
Yeah, it was a private high school in Somerset in the 1990s.
That checks out.
Yeah, I mean, actually, to be fair, there were non-Anglo people there, but no, it wasn't. Yeah. No, but I agree. It's more surprising because it's what you expect, a stereotypical Asian student to do.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, that's. But I think there's. Actually, I think in some ways, I'm much weirder in this regard and I think it's something that served me pretty poorly in life, actually. That like the total formlessness of my upbringing in this regard, like just do whatever you want as long as you're happy, from my mother. And my father, as I now kind of recognize, really his only aspiration was for me not to be involved in manual labor.
Yeah.
Because that was his only personal aspiration.
Well, I mean, he succeeded there.
Well, did I tell you this story? It absolutely. I've spoken to him once this year. I was on the Zoom with him.
Sorry.
What's so funny about that?
I don't know. Just the way you said it was funny.
I mean, I was about to. I don't know. I had a riposte in mind there, but it may cross the line even for this.
No, there are no lines here.
Okay, well, I was going to say, how many times have you talked to your dad this year?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
Right. No, that's right. That's
anyway,
right.
I still don't know why it's funny.
We are so back.
Is that why it's funny? Anyway, apologies.
That was good.
My dad, who was,
anyway,
is yeah, but he held up. He told me a story about his father, which I'd never heard before. It's great. This, in his declining years, you start getting this stuff popping out. But his dad, my grandfather was a glazier, so he worked glass. Yeah. And he told me the story that his dad would come home with his, this is 1940s, like no safety gear. His hands were full of broken glass, and my grandmother would pick the glass out of his hands. My dad said that he watched that and he remembered thinking, I'm never going to let those bastards do that to me. And he held his hands up to the camera and he said, I've never done a day's work in my life, with like evident pride.
Yeah.
And as he explained to me, because he'd always had white collar jobs, he didn't consider it working. This was like a huge like Rosetta Stone moment for me, because my dad does not see the difference between playing golf and being an accountant. To him, it's exactly the same. He's done both.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same activity. And for him, like my younger brothers who've never really had steady employment, for him, that is exactly the same as if they've been lawyers.
Yeah.
They're not working, as he put it. His uncle worked in the Ford factory in Dagenham. They're not working in the Ford factory in Dagenham. Consequently, they're not working.
Yeah.
And that is good.
Yeah, that's right. No. I mean, this is so good. I love this shit because, like, as a product of, my upbringing and my class and all these kinds of things, but like, I'm surrounded by this kind of, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing in all respects, but, you're surrounded by this romanticization of manual labor. But then we're beginning to lose this now, but people like your dad who actually remember what it was like to see someone who's actually worked. And all they want to do is leave that as quickly as possible, like genuine labor that you actually you rely on in order to live. There's a reason why tradies want to get off the tools by the time they're 25, because you don't,
Do a lot of tradies want to get off the tools by the time they're 25?
A lot do.
Yeah, right.
And that's also just because they want to make money. But because you make more money when you're not on the tools, when you're just running a business. But it's also just anyway. But yes,
it's interesting.
I love that story. That's.
Yeah, I feel it's very archetypal. It's also because my dad would say things that most people wouldn't. Like what? Like the thing he said.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
I thought you meant like.
Oh, no, there's lots of other things he said that most people wouldn't, many of which are not broadcastable. But so we were gonna. I mean, you did mention this before. We're gonna do this article reading, which I've been wanting to do for a while. We've done one. Obviously, we did an article reading episode years ago.
The metal one,
Guardian article, which really just classic stuff.
Goated.
The bottom line here though is I don't think we got material. I'm gonna share my screen.
I mean, is anything funny happening?
Nah.
I don't think anything funny is happening.
Well, I mean, but this begs the question: what is happening?
Funny, but funny? Are they that funny?
It's not about the whole point of reading stuff is not about whether funny things happen, whether people's reactions to them are fun.
I guess that's true.
Or also interesting because it's actually news to me that we're trying to be funny here, but
Whoa.
Was that what you were going for?
I love to be funny.
Oh no. That's so sad for you.
Are you sharing your screen?
I'm not. I was on the verge of it, but I'm edging with it, the screen share. Let's stop the gooning and share the screen. So as this is my browser, I was thinking of deliberately opening a really embarrassing thing. Probably most of this is quite embarrassing. So
I
we were
love- I
talking
love-
about
I love
two
that you've got-
dudes.
I love that you've got Peter Harcher,
And
Peter
Peter-
Fitzsimmons, and then Nietzsche Wiki.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
those are the
that's
great
so
lol
good.
cows. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's embarrassing in a way that I have the Wikipedia up. I was just looking up some basic facts about Nietzsche's life, you know.
Who's the most?
But it's disgusting. So we were talking about this guy because he's a massive. Look at that photo, though. Honestly,
It's so bad.
the neck. What is? And he's like Voldemort with a waddle.
Why did he stop wearing the bandana? Because the bandana was his trademark.
Yeah, it was a trademark, but it was only. I mean, it was. Yeah, it's an interesting
it was
question.
absurd. It was an absurd.
He's like, what have we got here? Look, here he is. It was an absurd affectation, but it was very. He wrote an article about this, you know, about how his wife suggested he should put on a bandana, and he did, and it looked good, and then he wore a bandana constantly for 10 years, and then stopped. Honestly, the one thing I would not criticize about that is the not wearing a bandana, but it looks terrible. But you know, I mean, that's you know, the criticism here is not so much that he naturally looks terrible but he would choose such an unflattering photograph, or that the scions of the Sydney Morning Herald, clearly the publication in which this appeared, have chosen that as his profile photograph. But he's like, the thing about Peter Fitzsimmons. I wanted to read something about Peter Fitzsimmons because I consider him. I think we're of one mind on this. He's the archetypal boomer. He's just doing the boomerist takes. He's a very late boomer, but he's just channeling the pure boomer spirit. The problem is he's like sundowning at this point. So actually, if you look at the last couple, I mean, the one he did earlier in this week, I was like, he did an article about talking about how he met Torval and Dean, which you're probably too young to remember. I mean, this is boomer material for boomers. Like, do you have to be at least as old as me to know who Torval and Dean are? I think. Do you know who they are?
Torval and Dean?
Well, they were a British ice skating duo who dominated competitive figure skating in the 80s. Right, like, which was a big deal at the time. Obviously, I was not interested as a child in this, but they were absolute household names. So that I'm not gonna, and the fact that he's now like doing these callbacks, like I met Torval and Dean. I mean, that would only impress people of his age, if that. And then there's other one he's done about how they've cancelled a 29-year. Apparently, there's been a sports panel show running on Fox Sports for 29 years that I've never heard of, called The Back Page, and he's like written an article. I mean, this is some niche shit. So it's not. I mean, unless we really go down, like, we could try and find something, but it's just not. I mean, we can. I think not. And then we were talking about
the GOAT,
Peter Harcher, the worst of all time, who is allegedly the political editor and international editor of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. So this is how compacted things have become in Fairfax, that he's got dual roles at two newspapers.
Fairfax is just Sydney shit now.
Is that true? That's funny because
pretty much
now that Melbourne is literally bigger than Sydney.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Like, it's anyway. But Peter Harcher, like, I've stopped reading him, and I know you. I'm not sure if you ever read him.
No, I never read. I mean, I have read his stuff because, you know, I still to this day, like, a certain compulsive reflex causes me to type S into my bar and the Sydney Morning Herald comes up. But yeah, like, he's
insane.
Well, he's interesting to me because he's like such a fanatical regime line guy. And his most recent one is about Jim Chalmers, the treasurer. I cannot imagine this is going to be anything other than utterly boring, even if it's good. And it may not be incorrect, actually, because the thing about Harcher that like negatively fascinates me is his absolute dog shit regime approved geopolitical takes. So when it comes to domestic politics, I don't know whether he's going to be amusing. And then he's written something on Trump, obviously. I don't know what to do with that, because it's such a strange space, all this discussion about Trump and Iran. It's gone all over the shop with people doing different takes on it. Very, very confusing for everyone because of the valences involved, right? Like, someone like Harcher presumably is 100% in favor of bombing Iran, but also 100% anti-Trump.
Yes.
That where he's then going to line up, it's going to be, he'll have to do like it's complicated take. I think since this one's a week ago, he does like an anti-Trump take that he would now have to take back, because I think the Trump bombing happened after that. So like
he's a huge fan of AUKUS as well.
Yeah, of course. Well, he was, but then he had these bizarre fucking takes from all these cunts, where they said, like, the Greens were doing this take when Trump won, they're like, now we have to withdraw from AUKUS because it's now dangerous. I mean, the Greens, I presume, were opposed to it anyway, but then you had like Adam Bandt, like, now it's like an urgent danger. You've got to get out of AUKUS because of Trump, which is like, as far as I'm concerned, the exact opposite of any reality-based reading of this. But then you also had, these kind of concerned trolls who were pro-AUKUS, who were like, now AUKUS is bad. And that's dumb too. And it's done because it's like, well, Trump is not Russophobic or xenophobic enough. AUKUS needs to be based on just sheer hate. So we'll get out. And then there's a piece about Trump and Russia, which, all it would, if we read that, all it's going to do is relitigate Russia. And as far as I can see, really, there is broad spectrum, nothing new to say about that we didn't say 3 years ago.
No, I think that's right.
I mean,
Australia is completely fucked up at the moment. There's like,
tell me about this.
No, but I mean, like, there's a chronic like indecision. There was an article yesterday where I think it was actually in Fairfax. I don't know. I think it was in Fairfax, and it was asking about, it was talking about the fact that Albanese and Plibersek and various members of the Labour left had had approved of Trump's strike on Iran, blah blah blah. And it was speculating whether the left faction in the Labor Party still existed, for any kind of in terms of actually intentional purposes. And I don't really care about that answer, to be honest. But it does seem to me as if, and this speaks to AUKUS and it speaks to the various, and it speaks to Harcher actually. Like there's a total schizophrenia in the Australian disposition towards itself and the world. Like you've got kind of the all the way with LBJ stuff, which is still there, but of course it's changed because now Never Trumpers can't reconcile those two positions. You've got the kind of small fleeting moments, which is basically only Paul Keating now. It's Paul Keating by himself about how Australia needs to realign with Asia and China, which now is like shouted down by people that would have been completely on board with it 25 years ago. Like Australia, I mean, this is not necessarily a new claim or even necessarily an original claim, but I just think Australia has, as a nation, with especially its ruling elite, they have absolutely no understanding or sort of orientation in terms of where they want to go and what they want to do. I know that's very broad, but I think it's right.
Yeah. But look, I've got some things to say. This may not.
I thought you might. I thought you might.
Well, listen.
Is Anthony Albanese lonely?
I love the fact that you pronounce his name à l'Italienne.
Well, I am spiritually Italian.
Yeah. That's unlike Albanese.
Yeah, I am more Italian than Albanese.
Albanese is Maltese, so he's descended from Arabic-speaking Sicilians who colonized that island 1,000 years ago. Well, he's not, because they're not Moorish. They speak Arabic because they came from the Mezzogiorno at a time when
he should, instead of talking about his mum and the council flats, he should talk about that.
But he doesn't know it, because I assume he's like estranged from his father.
Yes, he is.
So I think he's not his spiritually very much is not really Maltese. He's spiritually Irish, like his mum. But I don't know. It's hard to know. But he's, this is not what I want to say. So the main thing I want to say about this is there's a simple truth here, I think, which is talked about now less than at any time, I think, I've been over the last 25 years that I've been around Australia. 23 years, right? Since I first moved to Australia. Which is that Australia is not a sovereign country in any meaningful sense.
It's fucking great.
So this is the elephant in the room. And the level of denialism about this is now enormous. So what you basically have, you have a basic fact. Australia is not a sovereign country. It's essentially an American neocolony. So that's fact one. Fact two, though, is that everyone not absolutely everyone, so not, I think actually Paul Keating's probably committed to this. Even people like Malcolm Fraser and Paul Keating, who were dissenters about Australia's international alignment, because they're both former prime ministers of Australia, are committed to the false view, and Keating's been straight down the line. You can see his whole political career, how he's been committed to this view, even though it's bullshit, that Australia is a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
So that the illusion that Australia has the power. Now, this is the schizophrenia we're talking about, which is that all these politicians have to act as if they are, by their own free will, choosing to do things that they have no choice over at all, because they will be whitlamed if they don't.
Yes.
If Australia does not toe the line with America, and I think America is the important thing here. I think, did I talk about this in a previous episode? Like the one we did earlier this year, like right at the beginning, where we talked about. So, because it's not so much that Israel has massive, obviously Israel has some influence in Australia, but it's mostly reflected through the US.
Yep.
So Australia has to be with Israel because that's what America demands, because of Israel's influence in America. Australia is not allowed to have an independent foreign policy line. It can have minor modulations, so they can abstain on something rather than voting against in the UN. They can show some mild dissent in that way, but that's the limit. And they know that. The really interesting thing to me is, like, what do people like Penny Wong or Anthony Albanese, what do they actually think? Where's the cognitive dissonance? Because I wonder if they don't have to be, as people who clearly, natively, do not believe what they're saying about Israel. And you could say exactly the same, incidentally, about someone like David Lammy in the UK, like the foreign minister in the UK, who I think is in exactly the same position. What he personally actually instinctively would believe about this is 180-degree opposite of what he has to say in public. Do they know? Do they actually therefore have to make the calculation, well, I'm going to say this because it's necessary for the other things I'm doing, which I believe are good due to my other cognitive dissonances? Or have they actually managed to get to a space where they go, actually, somehow Israel is the good guy here, even from a perspective that doesn't allow this to be the case?
It's a good question. I think, and I'm speculating here, of course, but I think on an individual level, I think someone like Albo, I think his pragmatism has literally led him to now think that, like, I think now his politics is just pure pragmatism now. Like, I don't think there's anything else going on there. I do, and maybe I'm living out here a little bit, but allow me the moment. I think Penny Wong just fucking hates herself deep down. Like, I in the sense that I just don't think she agrees with any of this shit, but her kind of real politic is sturdy enough to just, like, hold the line.
Yeah, it's really interesting because
there's kind of spiritual death there for people. For people like Wong, like, whether you agree with her or disagree, it doesn't matter. But, like, there's no way you don't spiritually kill yourself by doing what she's doing. Not in the long term.
And quite early in the piece, right? Because the level of compromise you have to do to become one of these career politicians. But I think I called Albanese wrongly, very wrongly, when he was leader of the opposition, because I thought he was doing this small target strategy to become prime minister, and then his authentic leftism would reassert itself in some degree. Yeah. But he's been unbelievably craven, as he's done. Well, it's not quite so, because there are these funny bits, and this is, I assume this has to be the story they tell himself. Did he tell himself that the voice referendum was the price? It was, it was all worth paying for the price of all the other compromises worth paying if we could get the voice up, even though he didn't. Is it stuff like that keeps them going? My assumption would be, in some sense, yes, there's stuff they're doing, the government is doing, and they'll do something again this parliament that they will be able to go, okay, that's what I did. And he'll be able to have this narrative about himself where he's like, I was prime minister, but I got this done, this thing that I believe in, even though, and, you can't do everything, which is fair enough, actually. Honestly, I'm actually quite sympathetic to that position. If the position is, it's simply not an option. It's literally not an option for an Australian government to develop an independent foreign policy. You shouldn't even try. Just try to do some things. I wouldn't want to do the things they want to do, I think.
Sure.
But I think there's genuinely an argument there, because that attempt, although, my preference would be for a wholesale realignment, Australia to have, to be aligned to China rather than America, basically. But, honestly, that's like CIA moment. Like, there's no way.
Oh yeah. There's no way
that take even the most modest steps. You'd be gone.
You'd get Whitland immediately.
Look at what they did to Corbyn.
You
wouldn't be able to get
absolutely
within a, as soon if you try and run on something that is against the.
But I think I want to ask a big question here. Like it's a broad, big question, but it's like as a kind of prompt more than anything, just to go back slightly to this kind of idea of schizophrenia and not being able to have a genuine kind of foreign policy by virtue of not being a genuine sovereign nation. I remember when this AUKUS stuff first was in the news, whatever was that, 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I remember feeling like more so than I normally do, and I actually like had to take a moment, like feeling fucking crazy because everyone kept talking about how AUKUS was going to make Australia safer, and like, but the thing is, like, I'm perfectly willing to accept that people might have a different view to me, like that's fine. But the point is, I couldn't even understand rhetorically how you could believe that, how you could believe being a sort of servile base, effectively, for a nuclear fleet to do a war with China. How the fuck does that make you safer?
Yeah,
like just logistically, like I don't understand it.
But I don't know who believed it. Right?
People obviously did.
Well, I don't know if that's true.
Maybe not deep down, but like people repeated the bullshit.
Yeah, well, people. That's right. Yeah, but I mean, exactly. Like
these craven freaks.
This is there are these limit cases where you have to ask: is Peter Hutch just so drunk on Kool-Aid that he actually believes that? But in general, I think it's so. I don't think. I think that's a really
views.
I think it's a really important moment, actually, the AUKUS thing, because I think that was the single thing, actually, that this government has done, the Albanese government, that made me the angriest and also most like openly, like, I could say to anyone, I could say to my wife, they're fucking crazy. This is the most insane. And everyone would agree with me. Like, I didn't have to, like, most of my political takes, I've got to be very careful because they're very spicy and they require a lot of explanation. That one was just, but straight down the line, I think most people, it was an utterly unpopular thing. But this does speak to the point, which is no national sovereignty. The government had to do it. They did it regardless of the fact that it wasn't popular. But of course, it also, you have this kind of uniparty problem, which is like, no, there was no opposition to it either. So although people didn't like it, no one, and including, I guess were the Greens opposed? I assume they were.
Yes, they were.
Right. So that is your opposition, because one of the real weird things about Australia today is, unlike other Western countries, it doesn't have a viable right-wing populist movement that takes a different view on this stuff. Because I think like the biggest like far right party, One Nation, I don't think would take an anti-AUKUS line.
No, they wouldn't.
So
if they did, it would be a huge reorientation in their like general disposition.
Yeah, well, but they're also, they're so, it's, you could say that obviously, like, there's plenty of dumb people in the far right and everywhere, but the Australian far right is uniquely dumb, much like the rest of the political spectrum. Actually, it's like, it's just dismaying when you look at the personnel in any of the, anyway. But yes, so consequently, no one was actually challenging it, and consequently, it got up and wasn't really a problem, because it's not like people could vote for the other party.
That's right. But
and this is I think it's very different actually here between the other obvious case of like where there's tension, which is Palestine, because on the Israel-Palestine question, a lot of people are genuinely like media hypnotized, take the other view. Like, a lot of people, particularly older people, vehemently and authentically believe that Israel is in the right and we should support them and so on.
Oh, absolutely.
Not as many people, not enough people, incidentally, to make this a democratic position the Australian government would take without there being strategic reasons to do so. But still, there's a constituency for it.
But I think that, yes. And I think the thing that drives me insane is that how to list the ways. But the main one in regards to what we're talking about is just this constant repetition, and you see it all the time now. You see it in the think tanks, the hawkish think tanks that are feeding policy to both parties.
Yeah.
You see it in these craven freaks in the media who repeat these policy lines or these potential policy lines. This idea that we must arm in order to avoid some kind of conflict. This is such a basic point. I sound like such a fucking idiot, but it bears repeating because no one's fucking saying it, is that it's the arming that causes the problem. I'm sorry to be such a fucking freak, but like, this is a basic point. And historically, we are aligning ourselves with the force that are the ones that do the interventionist regime change shit against the country that has never done it.
Yeah.
I mean, these are basic facts that cannot be denied. And if you deny them, you are wrong.
You know, actually, I think there is something else going on here. I think you can chart a little bit some of the people who actually do believe that AUKUS is a good thing. Because despite what I said before, actually thinking this through, having talked about the kind of One Nation people, I think there is a kind of constituency for this stuff among older, like boomer tier, rusted on xenophobes they have imbibed a lineage of xenophobia in Australia that comes down from the xenophobia of the One Nation of the White Australia period.
Yeah,
that sees China as a constant demographic threat to this country that we need to have. So we need to have nuclear submarines, otherwise they'll colonize us. And it's
I wish they would.
Well,
that was a joke.
Inshallah. But this there's a tension there because the people who kind of believe that stuff are like obviously great. They're One Nation supporters. They're people who are totally at odds with the immigration policies of the government. But you therefore from that quarter get a lot of this concern trolling about like, there's 1 million Chinese Communist Party. I mean, you constantly get this stuff in the US as well, where they can't claim that all these Chinese international students are members of the Chinese Communist Party, which they may well be, because like being a member of the Chinese Communist Party is just like having a LinkedIn profile in China, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's like very much the equivalent, but nowhere near as evil. I mean, LinkedIn. I got to get to this at some point, but I really think LinkedIn is the Nazi party of our times. But yeah, well, I don't literally think that. It's like I'm trying to find a hyperbolic comparison, but I think it's the thick end of the wedge. But so this talk about there being Chinese communist covert networks to international students, this is something that, like, into the center, right, you get a bit of like National Party kind of like people like, this is the problem. So there's that. Those people are going to be in favor of nuclear submarines because they hope they'll be turned against Chinese international students or something at some point. But you also have this other, and I think this is the really key bit of the puzzle actually in understanding what's going on or what has been going on for the last decade of imperialism, which is I'm thinking of a guy I know in particular who is like a gay Marxist but works for like a right-wing think tanks pushing war on China. And I think there's an alignment of certain people who are like on the far left of the culture war, but they see in Russia and China, because they're relatively homophobic countries, that's the threat. It's a culture war threat. They see, actually not inaccurately. So they hate Putin, they hate Xi, and they're for them that's how they line up. And of course they get paid, so they then get. But I think the kind of national security state blob these are the kind of people who are in it. It's like people they align with neoconservative foreign policy because neoconservatism always came out of the left, like came out of Trotskyism and this kind of and various forms. It's not, it's not really conservative at all. It's liberal. So this kind of liberal imperialism that in this current one is like, they don't have, that Putin banned gay pride marches in Moscow. Let's get nukes.
Yeah,
and that's a small. It's not a large voting bloc.
Yeah,
but in terms of the people who are therefore willing to with a straight face say, yes, we need to defend Australia against China because of human rights or something that actually makes sense to them because of that part of the equation.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's possible. I think, but I think what's really like, I think that's right. In the sense that there's obviously like multiple sort of smaller blocks that are sort of running their own kind of their angle, as it were. But I'll keep this anonymous. But I was at a dinner the other day, and this person who was I would say a good liberal progressive said something along, I can't remember what we were arguing about, but it was like, I think it was literally, it was an argument between two people, and they were talking about the Israel stuff. And this guy said, compared to Israel, Russia and China, I guess this kind of speaks to what you're saying. Russia and China are doing, like, I can't remember the exact thing he said, but something along the lines of like unimaginably worse. And this is literally while Israel is kind of like, well,
yeah, it's literally not true.
I mean, it's literally false.
Yeah.
And I'm even happy to put aside. I'm even happy to put aside the Russia stuff, not because I don't believe it or whatever, but just because we're talking about China for now. Like, this is just patently false. And this idea that,
well, the patentness is difficult here.
But you heard it during COVID too. This idea, like I've heard this repeated so many times, which is like, oh, they locked people up in their rooms, they soldered up the doors. It's like, no, one dude, like one tiny low party official did that, and he was immediately fired.
Yeah.
Or
I actually didn't know that. I actually did. Interestingly, no one had debunked that for me previously.
Like, yeah, it was just one lunatic, and they were like, you can't do that anymore. And he's like, okay.
I just thought it was a good idea. But
that's another story. But like,
because the big thing with China, but this is the thing though. Like, you can read mainstream sources that will tell you all this stuff is true. In fact, these I would say, based on my ability to discern, I'm hardly an expert, but I believe these stories, these narratives are false. However, they're widely propagated, and indeed they're to some extent regarded as the truth in the mainstream media. And the two I'm talking about would be the Uyghur genocide in China, which I think is a false narrative, but is widely reported as fact. And if it's true, like, if you bought the most hyperbolic version of that, it would be reasonable to say that is worse than what Israel's doing. The sheer death count would be higher. I'm pretty sure it's not, but you could say. And I actually am not even aware of allegations about Russian conduct in Ukraine that would, in numerical terms, dwarf what Israel is doing in Gaza. But I mean, the numerical theme perhaps isn't the only measure. I mean, the big lie that I see it, but it's a lie that's serious enough believed to be the source of the indictment of Putin on war crimes to The Hague is the idea of Russia kidnapping children. But these are the stories that and I think that circulate.
I just want to be clear here, like, and I also think, and this is what really shits me too about this conversation about, no, sorry, not this one, the national conversation, is that, by me saying this, I am not necessarily defending Russia or defending China. I'm not sort of like going, okay, I'm completely China pilled or whatever, because I'm not necessarily. I'm not necessarily going to defend every aspect of the Chinese Communist Party. But the point is that if you're an Australian citizen and you have any kind of interest in your country, you don't have to be a patriot, but if you have any kind of interest in your country kind of succeeding in broadest possible terms, and by that I mean, not ending necessarily or whatever, you have to take this shit seriously. And the bottom line is that America is a far greater threat to your national security. What I mean is, if something's going to go wrong, it's going to be because you got dragged into a conflict.
Well, I agree. That's right.
By the United States. Like, that's right. That's the threat.
No, I agree. That's
no, it's not that is what I'm saying.
But I think this is why I got so apoplectic about the AUKUS thing, because if you have nuclear submarine, if you have American nuclear weapons in Adelaide, yes, Australia may actually be a recipient of a nuclear attack.
Yeah, that's right. Like,
it had a 0% chance otherwise.
If there was to be a nuclear exchange between China and America, by having nuclear subs, you are now a target, whereas you otherwise might not have been. So explain to me logistically how that makes you safer.
Yeah, but you can. I mean, but there's a very easy riposte to that, which is like, oh, so you're saying we should be nice to the Chinese because otherwise the Chinese will nuke us, rather than we should be nice to the Chinese because the Chinese are nice. But once you get into that argument, it's I think quite a losing one.
Well, I don't think that's it. I think it's just following the logic of AUKUS. Like I reject all of that shit. But
well,
I'm saying even following that logic, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but that logic, I mean, it's post hoc, like all this stuff is. Like all the stuff about we don't like China because of the Uyghurs, or we don't like Russia because they kidnapped Ukrainian children. These people do not care about the Uyghurs under other circumstances, and they do not care about Ukrainian children. People who care about these things would have very different politics. What people are actually concerned about is something else. And this is just, it's a line they will trot out to do, whataboutism in defense of Israel, apparently.
It's crazy to me.